you look back on it and exactly like you've said, you're just looking at that one good bit and you forget all the bad that comes with it. So I started to find that whenever I drank alcohol, I would wake up after a few hours and be unable to get back to sleep, like really wide awake, even if I was absolutely exhausted.
Today it's early morning here for me in Vancouver. It's afternoon for my guest in the UK. I'm happy to welcome William Porter to the podcast. William is a lawyer and an author, many things, but he's on the podcast as an author for a book that he's written called Alcohol Explained. And I'll just show you a picture of it. I've been spending the last couple of weeks with it. It's quite a read. I highly recommend it for anyone, whether you're involved in drinking alcohol or not. I think it's something that, I don't know, might even be good in a school curriculum, for goodness sakes, for everyone to kind of just really learn about what's going on with something that we drink at such ease. So welcome to the podcast, William. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
So alcohol has, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, it is categorized very differently than other drugs. It's not really considered a drug to many. We're on the patio, it's on the menu, it's being promoted to us, it's at events, it's being passed around at corporate events. It's not seen as an unacceptable thing to partake in, for the most part, in most societies, including the UK and Canada, where we both are. Yet it is a poison. It is an anesthetic. It is a depressant. It is all these things. So, William, you have done an extensive amount of research. And to get started, I came across your book. I found it so interesting the way you had presented just these facts about in such a simple way, yet shocking, many of them. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a bit to your personal experience with drinking alcohol and what led you to doing all this research to write the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started drinking when I was quite young. I was sort of 14. Crikey, I'm turning 50 next month. So I kind of
Okay.
like this is a long time ago now. But at the time, I think most of my friends started drinking at about the same age. I think this upcoming generation are much less enamored with alcohol, so they're just not drinking as much as we did. But it was very much par for the course for me. And over the next sort of 25 years, I just kept drinking, as you do, social situations, good times, bad, whatever, I would drink. And I found over time, the amount I was drinking was increasing. It was becoming increasingly problematic. And I didn't actually ever sit down and think, right, I'm going to research alcohol with a view to writing a book about it. I was just always very interested in what was going on with it, how it was affecting me, why it was affecting me in certain ways. And really, it just came about that I was inquisitive. So I started to find that whenever I drank alcohol, I would wake up after a few hours and be unable to get back to sleep, like really wide awake, even if I was absolutely exhausted, which to me seemed very counterintuitive because, like you said, alcohol is a sedative, it's a depressant, it's supposed to tire you out, knock you out, not make you hyper alert and stop you from sleeping. So I
Right.
would then research that and try to understand it. And that really happened over the space of sort of like 25 years as my drinking increased, as my desire for alcohol increased. I was just trying to understand why and how and the bigger picture with the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
And as I say, after sort of 25 years or so, I ended up with quite a comprehensive picture of alcohol. I stopped drinking, and then so Alcohol Explained was basically just me setting out that understanding in writing.
So did you stop drinking after you wrote the book or during the process?
I stopped drinking before I wrote the book, so I'd stopped drinking, um, and then I sat down to write the book. And it's kind of interesting because I can't remember the exact dates, but I think it was probably within a year or so I'd written the book, which might seem odd to a lot of people because I've stopped drinking and I'm sort of writing a book, a book on the subject, having not even done a year not drinking. But actually, I think that what it came down to is I'd been to AA a couple of times, and a lot of people approached AA with the same mindset I did, which was wanting to understand what was going on. I was thinking, well, why do I have to keep drinking and that person doesn't? Why can they have one or two and I can't? And thinking I would get answers from AA, AA is good for a lot of things, not so good at other things. I won't get into that now, but the fact of the matter is, it doesn't seek to explain what alcohol is, how it becomes addictive, etc., etc. And I found that a lot of people at the meetings were themselves in my position, trying to understand what was going on. And I also genuinely believed and believe now that a lot of the knowledge and understanding was what allowed me to stop drinking. For me, it was the key to stopping.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was it really.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's true what you say. NA, AA, the program, I know it helps a lot of people. It also did not work for me. I have lived experience with substance dependency of a different sort. But it's interesting how the facts and breaking it down kind of help really solidify things for you. And before I clarify, before I continue, I do want to clarify that I do not support prohibition for listeners, but I do believe that alcohol should be categorized as a drug as any other. And I think much of this, I have to be honest, is um, a couple of decades ago now, thank God. A little less than that, when I was stopping and healing from my substance dependency, I was quite frustrated that alcohol was not considered a drug. And here was everyone drinking, and that was not stigmatized, and they weren't being shamed. And here I was with my opiate disorder, and or however you want to call it. The name changes daily. I was dependent on opioids and I had a lot of shame, stigma, and stereotypes surrounding me, and I was quite ticked off about that, to be honest. So
Mm.
that's why initially, now with the knowledge, I just believe alcohol is a drug and should be as any drug. So, William, you mentioned some of the facts that you mentioned in the book are quite interesting. You describe alcohol as a poison that causes physical, psychological, and countless other harms, which is I think is a well-known fact for people who know anything about alcohol. But you go into a lot of detail, things that I had no idea. So here is a substance that is a poison, causes countless harms, yet is ruining millions of lives around the world. I believe you mentioned in your book that it's a part of 30% of suicides in the United States.
Yeah.
Quite shocking stat. Yet it's categorized separately, as I said, than other drugs and kind of encouraged as a part of daily life in a way, not directly, but indirectly in many ways, sometimes directly. Why do you think this is that alcohol is not categorized in the same way as other drugs? And how do you think that contributes to the harms it causes for people?
I think the reason for it is purely historic. If you look at alcohol, so let's say that we started humankind right now, and there was an agency sat there, government agency, and it was designed to look at drugs and say, can you have them? Can you not have them? Let's categorize them. Alcohol would absolutely be categorized as a class A. So it would be off the scale. In terms of the harm it causes, it's hugely more harmful than many of the other drugs we talk about. I mean, you talked about opioids. Um, when people take opioids, it's not like alcohol. They don't go out there and you know get into fights, etc., etc. Alcohol has this massive impact of harm on us. So it would absolutely be categorised as quite a dangerous intoxicant and not one anyone wants anything to do with. So it would be probably banned. But the problem is it's been part of human civilization since as far back as anyone can really um, detail it. So as far back as we can go, there's been alcohol, and the reason for that is very, very simple. It's very easy to make. So if you want to make, I don't know, cocaine or methamphetamines, you need quite detailed knowledge of the process, and you need to have the right equipment, and you need to go through the whole thing of creating it. With alcohol, you just need some rotten fruit and vegetables. And it really is that simple. Put the right type of yeast in, and you're making alcohol. So, humankind has been drinking for a long, long time, and it's completely intertwined into our society. So, there's a huge amount of financial impact. You've got some very big companies. The government makes an awful lot of tax money out of it, and culturally, it is part of our culture. So it really is kind of winged its way into our lives quite closely. So that's the reason for it. As I say, if you were to just come at it completely logically and say, okay, is this a good thing or a bad thing? It would be absolutely a bad thing. Um, but because of that historic relationship with it's treated completely differently.
Wow, yeah, it's interesting. I wonder how history will see us, many years from now, looking back. I had Ann Deffsett Johnston on the book. I don't know if you've read her book or if you've heard of it, Drink.
Hmm.
Um, and she explained to me, she talked about how, policymakers and politicians, they're not going to touch it. They don't want you, stepping in their rights of their evening wine, and it's
Yeah.
true, but it is insanity when you think of it. But the historical elements, you're right, certainly do play a massive role. Um, in Alcohol Explain, you detail facts such as the reality that alcohol is an anesthetic, a depressant. Um, Even for the casual drinker, you write about the extreme effects that alcohol has on one's sleep. Now, this, I knew it had effects on my sleep. I would say I probably have 2 drinks a year. I'm not really much of a drinker,
Mhm.
maybe 1 to 2 drinks a year, and I kind of do those in more of a way of kind of at an event to kind of be polite more than anything else. It's not a problem drug for me, thankfully, but, I don't enjoy drinking it, so but even the casual drinker, it affects their sleep tremendously. You speak to the fact that even a couple of drinks can ruin a night's sleep. Can you talk a little bit to the sleep component?
Yeah, absolutely. Be glad to. And then this it's a really good topic because it's just so interesting. But so obviously you've mentioned a few times that alcohol is a sedative or a depressant. When I use the word depressant, I'm using it in its chemical sense as something that decreases or inhibits nerve activity. Not all drugs, but a lot of drugs fall quite comfortably into one of two categories: the sedatives like alcohol, or stimulants, so things that wake you up. So caffeine and nicotine are stimulants. Alcohol, opioids are sedatives. So that's fairly straightforward. Where it gets a bit more interesting is the human brain creates and excretes a massive array of chemicals, drugs, and hormones that it naturally creates. So things that you would have heard of, like endorphins and cortisol and adrenaline, these are all chemicals that your brain creates and releases into your system at exactly the right time and exactly the right quantities to keep you alive, keep you alert, keep you fall asleep, whatever it needs you to do. It's all run by these different chemical drugs and hormones. Now, there's a huge amount we humans don't understand about this process. It's incredibly complicated. But what we do know is that the brain works by way of something called homeostasis, which basically just means a delicate balancing act of all these different chemicals, drugs, and hormones. So you've got this incredibly complicated process going on. Fortunately, you don't need to understand it to the nth degree just to get an idea of it. But you've got this balancing process going on. And then going back to what I said before, you've got a lot of drugs sitting easily into one category or another as either stimulants or sedatives. So your brain's trying to keep a balance of these. So the way I sometimes think about it is, the old fashioned weighing scales where you've got a bar with two baskets hanging off it and it tips
Yes.
depending on which one's the heavier. So imagine that's your brain and that's your brain chemistry, and one of the baskets is sedatives and the other one is stimulants. And your brain's weighing it up and it's got it absolutely perfectly level. When you consume alcohol, obviously it's a sedative, so you're tipping the balance. So what your brain does, it tries to counter it, and it does so in lots of different ways, but the effect is essentially to put a load on the stimulant side. so that your brain can work while under the sedating effects of the alcohol. So again,
Mm,
so you've got the weighing scale, you've tipped it in the side of the sedatives, and so your brain's dumped a load of, cortisol and adrenaline, etc. It puts into your system to balance it up. But then the alcohol leaves your system, so it tips the other way. So in essence, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So whatever sedating, relaxing, whatever you want to call it, feeling you get from an alcoholic drink, after 20 minutes, half an hour or so, there's a corresponding feeling of anxiety as it wears off. So you've got that process in mind then. So you've got that going on when you drink alcohol. If we just talk about sleep very briefly, and again, hugely complicated process, but there's a few things we can talk about nice and simply just to give everyone a sort of an idea. It's not just a question of falling unconscious for a few hours and waking up and you're good to go. When you sleep, you have to go through some very specific sleep cycles. And
mhm.
again, you've probably heard of a lot of them. There's something called deep sleep, which, as you would expect, you're very deeply unconscious. And then right on the other end of the scale, there's something called REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement. And the reason it's called that is because when people are monitored, their eyes flicker, even though their eyes are shut. It's a really interesting part of our sleep process. It's when we dream, and the brain lights up almost as if it's fully awake. So it's a really odd part of our sleep where we have our dreams, and when they monitor people, like I say, the brain lights up almost as if it's fully awake. Um, so again, if we just stop there, so sleep, you go through almost like, I think of it sometimes like a plane gliding up through the different layers of the atmosphere. You go like quite deep into deep sleep, then you come right up into REM sleep where your brain's lit up, you're dreaming, etc., etc., and you sort of drift in and out of these different sleep cycles. And as I say, the main one of the main differentiating factors is how deeply unconscious you are.
Right.
Now, when you drink alcohol, because it's a sedative, your brain finds it incredibly hard to jump up into REM sleep because it's sedated. So you can never get enough REM sleep when you're drinking alcohol. I forget the stats behind it, but I think it was something like you need a couple of hours of REM sleep. One or two drinks, it halves. Another couple of drinks, it halves again. And anything after sort of 5 or 6 drinks, it's zero. You just don't get any REM sleep. Um, the highest reported symptom of a hangover is tiredness because alcohol destroys your sleep. Now the problem is alcohol's got a half-life of about 5 hours. And what
Mm.
half-life is, it means how long it takes for the amount of the drug into your system to drop by half, and the half-life is 5 hours. What people usually find is after about 5 hours, they can't sleep at all. And this is what I was talking about at the beginning, that waking up after 5 hours. It was almost exactly 5 hours after I had my last drink, I would be wide awake. And again, that is that process where when you drink alcohol, you have all this sedative inside you. But then when it wears off, it doesn't just disappear, it leaves that corresponding feeling of anxiety. So basically, that's what happened when you drink alcohol. You don't get any REM sleep, which you desperately need. And then after about 5 hours, you can't really sleep at all because I quite often liken it to, say you need 8 hours sleep to be at your best and you sleep from, I don't know, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and that's you at your absolute best.
Right.
Drinking alcohol is like setting an alarm for 3 or 4 in the morning, waking yourself up, and then drinking loads and loads of strong black coffee to make you really anxious and overstimulated. So no matter how tired you are, your body's incapable of sleeping. And so that's what it does. And like I say, even one or two drinks is enough to disrupt that really delicate balance of how your brain drifts in and out of different sleep cycles.
So if we looked at it that way, and assuming we're looking at, an average, let's say corporate culture, then the majority of those in the corporate culture are they are not getting sleep essentially that they need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's this big thing of, you need it to socialize. I mean, as you mentioned before, I'm a lawyer, so a lot of work functions are
Mhm.
based around alcohol. But actually, if you want someone to be at their best, you can't really drink alcohol. But for me, anyway, I can't talk for everyone else, but I can talk for myself. If I don't sleep properly, I'm not at my best. Okay. If it's just a little bit of disturbed sleep, I'm generally all right with it. If it's more significant, it's worse. And after days and days of consecutive bad sleep, it just exacerbates the problem. And that's true for anyone. So people who drink alcohol regularly, they're just not functioning at their best.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, and I wonder, if someone was to hear this fact, the natural response would be, "Well, I will then never drink again." But something tells me that's not what many's natural response will be, right?
No,
It's just
no, no,
it's
no.
it's kind of an insanity. I
It's
don't
an
know.
odd one, but when I tell people this, the reaction I quite often get is, "Yes, but alcohol helps me sleep."
Mm,
There's another it's worth mentioning it because it's such an interesting topic. So you to all intents and purposes don't drink, 1 or 2 drinks a year, virtually nothing. So, and obviously I don't drink. So when we get towards bedtime, our brain naturally starts to turn things down. I've already mentioned about the different chemicals, drugs, and hormones, and it puts stuff inside us to drift off to a natural and restorative sleep. And that's why we're told so much about good sleep hygiene. You dim the lights, you don't have any white screens, etc., etc. What you're really doing is just sending the message to your brain, the day's over, it's time to sleep, so that your brain can start to close things down. Now, when you drink alcohol regularly, and of course, most people drink it towards the end of the day before they go to bed, they're taking a sedative, and it's the sedative that closes everything down. So, brain's phenomenally astounding, and it reacts to things, and it reacts very well. Um, when you drink alcohol regularly, it stops going through that natural closing down process because it doesn't need to, because it knows that every night it's got this quite powerful sedative coming in and doing the job for it. So if you
mm,
drink alcohol every night and then have a night off, you can't sleep because your brain is not doing its job because it's relying on the alcohol, which then isn't there. And it actually takes a few nights to get back to sleeping naturally. But the problem is when people are drinking regularly, their perspective is, well, hang on, I tried to have a day off alcohol a couple of weeks ago and I just laid awake all night. Therefore, I need alcohol to sleep, which is, a perfectly reasonable conclusion. But actually, they're missing those additional bits of information. It's not actually getting you to sleep. It might be knocking you unconscious, but there's a whole world of difference between alcohol induced unconsciousness and natural restorative sleep. They're two completely different things.
right, and that speaks into very much so how getting off of any substance and why getting off of any substance is challenging is because the brain has changed. It has adapted in a different way. It's expecting different things.
Yeah,
And, it would be great if there was a doctor who came up with something that said, okay, now we're going to send a message to the brain to regulate because
yeah,
we're no longer going to be putting these substances in because then we don't have all those withdrawals that can last sometimes for months,
yeah, yeah.
depending on the drug and length of duration of use. Wow. Um, so a couple of surprising facts from your book that I would love for you to share more detail on. If one continues drinking throughout a period of hours, you speak to nausea receptors are often not triggered. So, meaning that you are actually ill and not feeling ill. So, you're not going to feel that illness until perhaps that blackout or that sleep, that 5 hour sleep has occurred. You've woke up, it's come out of your system. And then perhaps you've had the amount of alcohol that will trigger those nausea receptors. So, we could be here having 6 drinks and I'm actually quite sick, but I just don't realize it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that goes to back to the point of alcohol is an anesthetic and it anesthetizes or numbs those receptors that basically make you want to be sick. So you're consuming a poison and your body's natural reaction is to expel that poison as quickly as possible. And it does that by making you vomit. But those receptors, as I say, have been anesthetized, so you can't do it. This was one of the things I found sort of odd. And, like I was saying before about I was drinking and just thinking about things and wondering about things. And it seemed odd to me because you do occasionally get people throwing up at night or being ill at the night, but it's unusual. Mostly people feel fine in the evening, and then the next day they wake up, they're feeling a bit ill. And to me, that didn't make sense because by the time you've got to the morning, you've had a few hours for your body to process the alcohol and to get rid of it. So you should feel better, not worse. And there's two reasons for that. One is that the alcohol breaks down the liver breaks down the alcohol by turning it into something that I think a aldehyde, which is incredibly poisonous. So it does actually build up in your system after you stop drinking, as the liver processes it. But yeah, it didn't make sense to me to think, well, why are you ill so many hours afterwards? And that's the reason. You've got that poison in you; it's doing damage. But the thing that should be protecting you is anaesthetized.
Yes, and I would find, in college when I would drink massive amounts of alcohol, um, I would wake up feeling fine, actually probably still intoxicated,
Hmm.
and, kind of a bit giddy, and then the afternoon came, and it was not a pleasant time. So it was kind of like the delayed hangover because I had consumed so much alcohol, I guess it was taking that much time for it to leave my system.
Yeah, absolutely. You can wake up the next day, and I remember doing that years ago. I'd wake up actually still feeling quite drunk. You almost carry on the party when you wake up the next day, but obviously that
Mhm.
changes over time because, as I mentioned before, I mentioned about that process of how your brain reacts to alcohol by becoming oversensitized so that it can work under the sedating effects of the alcohol. But of course, over time, your brain becomes increasingly proficient at countering the alcohol. So that's what tolerance is. And again, that was one of the sort of the things that triggered my interest because everyone's aware of tolerance. After 20 years of drinking, you can drink significantly more than you could on your very first day. You have like 3 or 4 pints or glasses of something first time you ever drunk and you'd be physically sick. Whereas, 10, 15 years down the line, you do that with absolutely no problem at all. And what I wanted to understand is what's changed, what physical change is in that person that allows them to consume a greater amount of the poison. And the answer is that their brain's becoming more and more proficient at putting in all these different stimulants, etc., and becoming oversensitized so that it can work. And it just becomes better and better at it. But the downside to that is, like I said, every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you have a glass of wine, when it wears off, it will leave a fairly minor feeling of anxiety. If you have 7 or 8 drinks, that feeling of anxiety is massively increased.
Mhm. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about, well, the sleep component and also the, nausea component, the anxiety, the hydration component. So this is always something that, I'm sure people do it to this day in college, the regular drinkers. I'm going to chug 2 bottles of water before I go to sleep. And in the morning, I'm going to feel fine. And somehow, maybe there's some placebo effect that works, but you're explaining how it does not work at all, except for get us up to go to the washroom in the night. So, can you run through that? Why doesn't drinking? We're hydrating our body. Aren't we moving things along so we can wake up feeling okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So how hydration works is your body has a reserve of water. Okay, so it's just there if needed. So let's say you're perfectly well hydrated. Don't need to go to the toilet. You don't need to have a drink. You're just as you are, good position. If you get hot, you'll start sweating. So your brain, your body keeps this reserve of water in case you suddenly get hot, you suddenly have to sprint away or whatever, and you need to sweat to cool yourself down. So it has this reserve, and obviously, if you have too much, it will get rid of some, obviously by going to the toilet. Now, what diuretics do, and diuretics are chemicals that make us go to the toilet to urinate. They mess about with our calibration system so that when you drink alcohol, caffeine does it as well. Your body thinks it's got more reserve liquid than it does, so it just gets rid of a load of it. And that's why people often find when they have a drink they have a couple of drinks and suddenly they need to go to the toilet. And actually, they seem to be weeing out far more than they've actually consumed in liquid. And that's exactly what it is. Your body's now, it's got this. amount of water, whatever that might be. And because of the effects of the drug, it suddenly thinks it's too much. So it's just getting rid of it. Okay. Now, that is how alcohol dehydrates you. It's a chemical effect, and your body jettisons liquid that it should really be keeping hold of. Now, the point there is you cannot hydrate until that effect has worn off. Because if you've had a few drinks and you've dehydrated yourself, your body's sat there thinking it's got enough of this reserve liquid and it hasn't, it's got rid of it all. And then you chug a litre of water, it just goes straight out of you because your body's still sat there not thinking that it needs it. So you actually have to wait for the alcohol completely to wear off before you get thirsty again. And I remember doing this myself. I'm not sure if you can relate to it, but you wake up, you're hungover, you're not feeling too good, and sort of later on in the day, you suddenly get really thirsty. And all that's happening there is your brain suddenly, the alcohol's worn off, and the brain realizes, actually, I haven't got half of enough liquid as we need here, so we need to get a load more in. So to drink water, which triggers your thirst. But there's another layer to this, because when you drink liquid when you're not thirsty, it actually washes salt out of your system. And it's
Mm.
possible to kill yourself by drinking too much water. Years ago, there was a thing in the UK where people were taking ecstasy and going to gigs and dancing and dancing and dancing and sweating all night and then falling unconscious. Some of them died because they were dehydrated. So there was a massive campaign: don't do drugs, but if you do, make sure you're hydrated properly. And then shortly after that, people started dying because they were drinking too much water. So they take an ecstasy tablet and drink and drink and drink and drink, and they wash all the salt out of their system. Doesn't happen often, but this is the strange thing. You're drinking to get the drug, not because you're thirsty. And like, so for me, I would happily go out of an evening and drink 4 or 5 pints of beer. But imagine drinking 4 or 5 pints of water. It would make
Mhm.
you feel really sick, or 4 or 5 pints of orange juice. You just couldn't manage it. So that's what you're doing. And one of the reasons we get dizzy and we get salt cravings, or you wake up the next day and you're desperate for fast food, is because food's very heavy in salt. And because you've been drinking beer, wine, whatever, more liquid than you naturally drink, it's washed the salt out of your system. So actually, chugging a bottle of water before you go to bed just makes it worse. Because you're making yourself have to get up to the toilet more than you'd need to anyway. But more importantly, you're just adding to the whole problem of washing salt out of your system.
It's wreaking havoc on the human body. It
Yeah.
really I feel as I'm thinking of the human body, I'm feeling empathy for the body. It's just when
Mm,
as I was reading the book, and because, like I said, I don't drink often, it actually made me think if someone put a bottle in front of me now, I think I'd throw it out the window because it would just be like, oh, you know what I mean? It's
yeah.
just so I can see. Now, that being said, I wonder if the time in which I was using opioids, if someone had given me the deep scientific facts of what was happening in my body, if that would have changed my perspective, because that was my drug of choice. So alcohol has never been appealing to me in that way. So I wonder if that's why I'm so, oh, yeah, that's just, or if, it would be interesting though, just to see what would happen if your book was incorporated into recovery programs, whether they be inpatient or outpatient
Mm.
program. When people know the facts. I think the subconscious is something that is important to discuss here. If we're really going to understand alcohol as much as we can in the 40 minutes that we chat. But, you explain in the book that the subconscious plays a huge role in things, and subconscious um, is responsible for a lot of our behaviors. And I think that that's important to cover. Can you talk a little bit about how the subconscious and conscious mind uh, kind of really play a role in the different stages of drinking and kind of what our thoughts and perspectives are around alcohol?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting topic, that, actually. So when I talk about the subconscious, a lot of people use the term a lot and don't really stop to think about what it actually means. So just to be clear, when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about a subconscious, almost automated thought process that you go through. So when you do something regularly, you don't have to consciously think about it. You just do it automatically. And that happens by basically repeated behavior. So driving's quite an interesting one. And that's the one I think I mention in the book. You know, if you're driving along, you've got your foot on the accelerator and then you take it off and you put it on the brake to slow the vehicle down. And you do that for hundreds and hundreds of hours while you're driving. And then if you're a passenger in a car and the driver's driving too fast or too close to the vehicle in front, you find your leg keeps tensing. Now, there's no logical reason for that because you don't have a brake, but your brain has just learned over how many hundreds of hours you've been driving. If you want to slow the vehicle down, and all of a sudden you tense that right leg to push down on the brake. So there's a lot of subconscious reactions that are innate, sort of we're born with them in our genes, but there's a significant number that are learned. So a baby wouldn't have that reaction in a car. You need to sit in a vehicle and do it over and over and over again for that to be your automatic reaction. Now, with alcohol, it is a sedative, okay? And we've talked about how it wears off, leaving a corresponding feeling of anxiety. Now, there's two ways to get rid of that unpleasant feeling, that feeling of anxiety that's sat there. The first way to get rid of it, the best way to get rid of it is to never drink again, because after a few hours and days, your brain chemistry gets back to normal and that unpleasant feeling's gone. But who wants to wait a few days? You know, we want to feel good right now. And the quickest way to feel good is to take another drink, because the reason you feel a bit uncomfortable, a bit stressed, a bit anxious is because your brain's geared up to work under the stating effects of the alcohol, but there is no alcohol present. So you take the drink and it immediately corrects that chemical balance and makes you feel an awful lot better. Now, over years, your subconscious learns this. Okay. So it knows that when you've had an alcoholic drink, there's an unpleasant feeling that kicks in 15, 20 minutes or so after the last one. And the best and quickest way to get rid of that unpleasant feeling is to take another drink. So when your brain makes that link, the subconscious makes that connection forever after, your brain will trigger you to want a drink when the effect of one drink wears off. So each drink causes you to want to reach for the next one because it will wear off. It will leave that unpleasant feeling and your brain will interpret that as, I want a drink. And that's how the subconscious basically factors all that in, which is interestingly one of the reasons why it takes so long to get addicted to alcohol. You know, most people will drink for years before they come fully dependent on it. And a lot of people will live and die without getting anywhere near being heavily dependent on it.
Mhm.
And that's the reason for it. With a cigarette, when you consume the cigarette and you breathe the smoke into your lungs, the nicotine hits your bloodstream. So you feel the effects of a drug when the drug hits your bloodstream. So with nicotine, the smoke goes into your lungs, it goes into your bloodstream, it's there within about a second. So it's a really quick reaction. With alcohol, it has to go into your stomach, be absorbed. It takes a lot longer. So consequently, it takes much, much longer for most people to become dependent on it because it takes longer for them, for their subconscious to make that link. But when you're, like I say, when your subconscious does make that link, the wearing off of each drink causes the desire for a next one. And that's basically when people say, I don't have an off button. You know, I can't, I'm happy not drinking, but if I drink, I just want to keep going. And then, you know, you hear that a lot from people that they say they don't have an off button. And what they really mean is they've been drinking for long enough that their subconscious makes that link. So when they drink, they don't want to just have one and stop.
Mhm. Yeah, the subconscious mind is very powerful and something that we're not always aware of. I highly encourage you. There's a lot more to the subconscious that mind and elements around alcohol that William details in the book, and about 20 more questions around it that I'd like to ask. So I highly encourage you to read the book. As I was reading it, my husband was trying to get some work done. He's taking a class, And I kept stopping him over and over and over and over. Did you know? Did you know? Oh my gosh, this is why. And after a while, he said, listen, I'm going to read the book. Okay. I can hear that it's very interesting because I mean, there was just so much I thought I knew. Um, because I've read quite a few books about substance use and such. But yeah, the subconscious mind and the way in which it plays a role in different levels too for the casual drinker, the binge drinker that just drinks on the weekend, and then of course the more progressed dependent drinker. Um, there is one thing that I wanted to ask you about here that I really don't want to miss, and that is the fading effect bias, FAB.
Hmm.
This stuck with me because in my lived experience, this was something that had an effect, a positive effect on my recovery. And I called it playing the whole tape. Because it's easy for us to, when we, in any components of life, as you explain in the book, but especially when you enjoy a substance and a few days have passed since those unpleasant feelings of hangover or withdrawal or whatever it may be, or a negative effect from your drug use of choice. And you only remember the pleasant things it brings, relaxation, anti anxiety, whatever it may be. But you seem to forget that it also caused strains in your relationships. You spent thousands of dollars on this drug. It caused effects on your health, and all the toxic things that it brought to your life. Fading effect bias. Play the whole tape out. Can you explain how fading effect bias, or FAB, plays a role in problem drinking so that people can understand how that works?
Absolutely. And this very much goes back to my own drinking because I stopped for some quite extended periods, but I could never stay stopped. I was always going back to it. And most of the time when I stopped, I would, say you need to stop for a week, a month, whatever, but you can go back to it afterwards. And even if I wasn't intending to, I would obviously end up back with it. And fading effect bias, it's a fascinating topic, but it's basically the way in which humans are predispositioned to look more positively on past events than when they were actually happening. So it's the very embodiment of rose tinted spectacles, of looking back and the good old days and nostalgia. Now, the interesting thing is it's universal throughout the human race. So it's not tied to just, say, for example, people in the West or wherever. It's absolutely universal. So all humans from all over the world show this tendency. There's a Obviously no one knows how or why we have it, but it's primarily thought to just help you maintain a positive outlook because you look back over your life and you think it was good when maybe it wasn't quite so much. So it helps you maintain this positive outlook by looking back on past events and thinking that they were much more positive than they were. But the problem is when you apply it to drug addiction, because you look back on it and exactly like you've said, you're just looking at that one good bit and you forget all the bad that comes with it. Um, Really simple example then. So you take an alcoholic drink and you say, I like the flavor and I like the effect. Okay. So you have the taste and you have the effect, and the effect lasts maybe 15, 20 minutes. It then wears off, leaving that corresponding feeling of anxiety. You ruin your sleep, so you're tired the next day, and you have that residual anxiety and tiredness for the whole rest of the day. And that's if you have one. If you have two, three, four, all the downside gets worse. So whichever way you slice and dice it, if you look at 100% of the experience of having an alcoholic drink, from the drinking it to the few days later when your brain chemistry finally gets back to normal, 5%, if we're being really generous, is the inverted commas enjoyable bit, and the rest of it is unpleasant. But
Mhm.
when we sit back and think about it, we think about the good bit. And it's more than that, I found as well, because a lot of my drinking, I wasn't exactly sat there enjoying each and every drink anyway. I was just, after the first couple, you're not really aware of it. And again, I wasn't looking at the fourth, fifth, sixth drink that I was having in front of the TV when I was semi-comatose and really not enjoying it anyway. I was just thinking about that one or two right at the start where it was really enjoyable. So
Mm.
that's basically what fading effect bias is and how it affects addiction, alcohol or whatever so badly. Because after we've stopped for a period, we think back only to the good bits of it. And that's the really heartbreaking thing because you sit there thinking about all the good times on it, and then you have it, and you don't go back to that rose tinted dream, you go back to the reality. And that for me is a really heartbreaking thing. The thing that keeps drawing people back in, be it alcohol or any other drug, doesn't exist. Because the
Mhm.
great thing you're thinking about when you go back to it, it's not real.
Yeah, it's an illusion, and it's interesting because anyone around you, watching you as a problem drinker or drug user could say, "You're not seeing this straight," and you would it doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Those that positive, piece that you're seeing seems to be so positive that it will allow you to go back to something that was so, problematic over and over again, and you're right, it is heartbreaking.
mhm,
And I'm sure you've had heartbreaking moments, as have I in my own life, but I've seen it in others, I continue to, and it really is something that, yeah, it can destroy lives and it can end lives. It's awful. Um, before we wrap up, I mean, there were so many facts. I had trouble, really drafting out a guide as to what I was gonna cover with you. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was, you know, alcohol and the way in which people that are not problem drinkers may think about what they're saying or how they're behaving around alcohol, to potentially kind of watch for those future signs that that may be or that that could be a problem moving forward. And one of them is I'd rather have no drinks than one or two. I've said it.
mhm,
I actually have even said it in the past 5 years because one or two drinks, I've got a headache. Why are we doing this? At
mhm,
least we have a few drinks, we're getting a little bit relaxed. And I think a lot of people have that outlook. And the other one is, you know, um, young people who don't want to be involved in, you described a luxury cruise with family, and that's one example of many where the drinking age doesn't allow them to drink, so they don't want to participate. But they're not problem drinkers or alcoholics. But at that time, that they're not going to go because of that. Those two things, looking at them at face value, as we discuss here, look very problematic. But to us as a society, they are kind of just, you know, kind of the norm for in many cases. Thoughts on those?
yeah,
And just the theme as a whole?
yeah, I completely agree. I think one of the problems we've got with alcohol is it's kind of sold to us that certain situations are not quite as fun without a drink. So a holiday, Christmas, whatever it is, vacations, that's very much sold to us. This situation, this meal, this social gathering will be better with alcohol. And it's a short step from there to say, well, it's not as enjoyable without alcohol. Now, the problem is when you're drinking at these social situations and then you go to one and you're not drinking, it feels like something's missing most of the time because you're thinking about the alcohol and should I have a drink, should I not have a drink, and it causes that almost dripping tap. So for a 17, 18 year old, they clearly don't have to have alcohol, they're not alcohol dependent, but if you can get them to believe that this social situation is more fun with a drink, or actually there's not much point going to a party if you're not having alcohol because you won't enjoy it, you're creating that need for something. They have to have, they may only drink once a week, once a month when they go out, whatever. But if they cannot enjoy that situation without alcohol, to my mind, something's wrong there because you should be able to participate and enjoy life fully without having to take chemicals and drugs in order to do so. But it's become so normalized in society that we don't bat an eyelid about that. If somebody says, I don't want to do whatever because there's no booze involved, we accept it. But actually, to stop, like I say, stop and think about it, that's not a good sign.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's indications, and those are two of them that I think are quite common that you outline. in the book, this is the book, Alcohol Explained by William Porter. This is I don't want to say it's an easy read because, as I mentioned, I kind of became a little bit enamored with it to the point that I was actually rereading parts of it and had my highlighter out as if I was in a university class. But it is a easy read in the sense that it's simple to understand. It's not a scientific paper, it's not a research paper. It presents facts that are going to bring new awareness about a substance that is very much accepted as a part of our daily life in most of the world. And I think it's something that is worth picking up. William Porter and Alcohol Explained. Thank you so much, William, for sharing all of your expertise. Thank you for writing this book and for being here today. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been really good. Thank you. Be kind and truly connect. You are listening to Rachel Thexton Connects.